The invasion of the Netherlands by Germany in World War II is not exactly a major conflict in the vast battle stories of the war. In fact, it was kind of a footnote in the midst of it happening. Hitler's plan to bypass the Maginot Line of France would be conducted by flanking through Belgium and Luxembourg. But to open up the front a bit more and prevent bottlenecking and slowing his forces, he also needed to take the southern part of the Netherlands, and once committed, the entire country. This was more of a gamble for the other side of the planet, where breaking the Dutch neutrality would go on to prevent the Dutch sale of oil to the Japanese war efforts in China. But back here in the Peel region of the Netherlands, the map was about to get very arrowy, and a small group of Dutch soldiers were about to do everything they could to disrupt the German plans in what would turn out to be a chaotic fight with shooting going in every direction imaginable. In a lot of ways, the Dutch weren't exactly surprised. After World War I, Germany began rearming in the mid-1930s, creating new threats of war. The Netherlands realized its defenses needed improvement and formed covering detachments, with soldiers stationed along the coast, important ports, traffic junctions, and along all borders. Here in the Peel region, a Peel detachment was formed in 1938 and 1939. Military architects designed it as a secondary barrier, positioned several kilometers inward from the primary Maas River defenses. The line stretched from Grave in the north down through Peel marshlands to Weert near the Belgian frontier. What made this defensive concept particularly clever was its integration of natural and artificial obstacles. Where Mother Nature provided marshes, rivers, and difficult terrain, the Dutch worked with the existing features. Where geography proved insufficient, they created their own barriers. The crown jewel of these artificial obstacles was the Defense Canal, an 80-kilometer excavation that functioned as both an anti-tank ditch and a coordination point for defensive operations. This wasn't simply a trench, it represented a sophisticated engineering project featuring concrete fighting positions, wire entanglements, and carefully planned demolition sites. Mil emerged as a critical node in this system due to its geographic vulnerabilities. Unlike other sectors protected by extensive wetlands, the approaches to Mil offered relatively firm ground suitable for mechanized forces. The town's position at a railway junction with multiple westward roads made it strategically irresistible to any invading army that happened to come from the east. Dutch engineers compensated for these natural disadvantages by concentrating their defensive efforts. They constructed nearly 50 concrete positions along the canal, established layered minefields, and prepared elaborate rail obstructions. These asparagus barriers, steel beams arranged to tear apart approaching vehicles, would soon prove their worth in a dramatic fashion. Germany's assault on the Netherlands began with tactical deception. Early morning observers tracked formations of Luftwaffe aircraft heading toward the North Sea, assuming they were bound for England. The reality became apparent only when those same formations executed coordinated turns over the North Sea and began attacking Dutch targets. The German plan for breaching the Peel ram line demonstrated both audacity and risk. Rather than conducting conventional infantry assaults against prepared positions, they opted for a mechanized penetration using armored trains. This approach promised speed and surprise, but depended entirely on maintaining momentum. At 4:30 in the morning, German forces achieved their initial objective. An armored train, followed closely by a troop transport, successfully crossed the Dutch border and passed through the outer defensive positions without encountering any resistance. The pre-dawn darkness and general confusion about the invasion's timing worked perfectly in their favor. The Dutch forces in the area had been informed only several minutes prior that a potential invasion was underway, and witnessed the armored train, immediately followed by a troop train, hastily passing through their sector. The initial fog of war caused a more precautionary stance, preventing them from obstructing, firing upon, or attempting to stop the trains out of fear that they may have been Dutch. The German commanders must have felt considerable satisfaction as their trains rolled westward towards Zeeland Station, the intended stopping point several miles west of Mil. Their unconventional approach had apparently succeeded beyond expectations. No Dutch resistance, no obstacles, and no complications. This satisfaction proved premature. Dutch forces required only minutes to process what they were witnessing and respond accordingly. While the initial crossing caught them off guard, their recovery demonstrated the value of their proper training and preparation. After unloading the troops, the German commanders reported somewhat dismally that they had faced no opposition crossing into the Netherlands. The order was given to maneuver the transport train to a side rail, and the armored train would be sent back toward the border to root out any opposition forces that were now in the German rear. Dutch engineer units immediately began constructing rail obstacles using pre-positioned materials. The asparagus barriers they assembled represented more than simple steel beams. They embodied months of planning for exactly this scenario. One thing I can't exactly determine, though, was exactly what the commanders and engineers were expecting to happen next. It seems like a low possibility that an invading train would go past the defensive line and then turn around and return. So the orientation of the asparagus barriers were pointed in the direction of what would be an oncoming train from the east. These were essentially precursors to the Rommelspargel, which could be seen along the French coast, which would point the ends at incoming vehicles and top them with mines. The invading train, having turned around and now headed to the east, would eventually hit these barriers almost as a ramp. Either way, the timing was impeccable. The German armored train, having completed its mission and begun its return journey, encountered these freshly installed obstacles at full speed. Physics took over from military planning at that point. The collision sent the lead car tumbling into the canal, while the remaining cars jackknifed across the tracks. What followed exemplified the chaos of modern warfare. German crews, stunned but not incapacitated, immediately attempted to establish defensive positions using nearby Dutch casemates. Dutch defenders responded with coordinated small arms fire, forcing the invaders to seek cover. When rifles and machine guns proved insufficient against the train's armor plating, Dutch artillery observers called for fire support. This escalation transformed a tactical skirmish into a major engagement that would consume the entire day. General van Nijnaten's situation report at 0500 hours painted a sobering picture for the Dutch headquarters. German forces had not only breached the Peel-Ram line, but also secured an intact crossing at Gennep. The invasion was proceeding on multiple axes simultaneously, threatening to overwhelm defensive coordination. The authorization to deploy the 2nd Hussars Motorcyclist Regiment represented a calculated gamble. These mobile forces possessed the firepower and tactical flexibility needed to contain the German penetration, but committing them here meant accepting risks elsewhere along the front. German tactics evolved throughout the morning as additional forces arrived and commanders assessed the situation. The troops originally transported to Zeeland began executing flanking maneuvers against Dutch positions, while other units infiltrated through gaps in the defensive line. Their systematic approach to reducing Dutch casemates demonstrated professional competence and battlefield adaptability. The Dutch defense proved more resilient than German planners had anticipated, though. Individual acts of heroism, like the unnamed soldier who single-handedly held his casemate position against overwhelming odds, combined with the effective use of supporting fire, slowed German progress significantly. By 7:30 in the morning, the arrival of Dutch reinforcements had shifted the tactical balance. The Hussars' success in neutralizing the German troop train eliminated a key asset, while their anti-tank weapons provided capabilities the initial defenders had lacked. The afternoon phase of fighting featured increasingly desperate German attempts to break through before darkness complicated their operations. Artillery exchanges intensified, small unit actions proliferated, and both sides committed their remaining reserves to the struggle. When fighting finally subsided, the casualties told a remarkable story. German forces had suffered over 500 killed and wounded, while Dutch losses numbered approximately 80. The German advance had been delayed by a full day, time that proved invaluable for Dutch forces repositioning throughout the country. More importantly, the Battle of Mill demonstrated that well-prepared defensive positions could exact a devastating toll on mechanized forces, even when those forces achieved initial surprise. German commanders initially believed that they had destroyed significant Dutch formations, only to discover later that they had been fighting a relatively small covering force. The intelligence failure would have broader implications for their operational planning in subsequent phases of the campaign. The Netherlands surrendered on May 14th following the devastating bombing of Rotterdam, though some forces in this area continued resistance until May 17th. The German ultimatum to the Dutch on May 14th, threatening a destruction of the city of Rotterdam, was ignored by the Dutch, and subsequent bombing of Rotterdam city center, leaving 80,000 homeless and hundreds dead, demonstrated the futility of continued resistance against overwhelming force. The Netherlands would officially surrender when the Germans gave a second ultimatum against the city of Utrecht. Yet the stand at Mill had achieved something significant. It proved that determination and proper preparation could disrupt even the most carefully planned military operations. The delay imposed on German forces provided time for other Dutch units to execute withdrawals and establish new defensive positions. In the grand narrative of World War II stories, the Dutch campaign is only a brief chapter. But for those who fought along the defense canal, those 5 days in May contained a lifetime of heroism, sacrifice, and determination that are remembered in stories today. Check out these other videos which you might find interesting. Thanks for watching, and as always, until next time, get lost.